In the dead of night, Chad's security forces were about to uncover something so massive that it would force an entire region to wake up and face a terrifying truth, one that powerful nations wanted buried forever. What started as routine intelligence about a suspicious convoy near the border would expose a conspiracy so vast it changed how African leaders view their own security. When President Mahamat Devi received that urgent alert, he had no way of knowing he was about to stumble onto one of the most dangerous smuggling operations the Sahel had ever seen. A midnight interception, 57 trucks. And beneath the layers of humanitarian aid packaging lay something that would send shockwaves through every government in the region. We're talking about an arsenal of weapons so extensive, rifles, rocket launchers, explosives, and millions of rounds of ammunition, that it could have armed an entire insurgent army waiting in the shadows. This wasn't a small operation. This was industrial-scale destabilization. But here's where the story gets complicated, and where most media outlets stopped asking the right questions. Who was behind it? And more critically, why was such a massive weapons cache being secretly transported in the first place? As investigators began piecing together the evidence, they realized this convoy was only the visible tip of something far darker. The weapons didn't appear out of nowhere. Every bullet, every launcher, every explosive had been sourced, packaged, and routed through a deliberate supply chain. Someone had invested serious resources into this operation. Someone with power, money, and the ability to move weapons across borders without detection. The more officials dug into the seized cargo, the more a sinister pattern emerged. This wasn't just about trafficking. This was about a calculated regional destabilization strategy, a deliberate attempt to flood the Sahel with weapons designed to ignite conflict, topple governments, and create chaos across an entire geopolitical zone. The implications became impossible to ignore. If this convoy had reached its intended destination, if those weapons had been distributed to armed groups already operating in the region, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Chad would have faced a full-scale insurgency. Neighboring countries would have seen spillover violence. The entire fragile security architecture that had been painstakingly built across the Sahel would have collapsed. And in that chaos, who would benefit? Who was waiting in the wings? This is where the investigation took a dramatic turn. The weapons shipment wasn't an isolated incident. It was connected to something bigger, something that implicated powerful figures both inside the region and beyond it. Investigators discovered that the operation involved a hidden network of traffickers, political insiders, and foreign-backed operatives working in concert. This wasn't amateur hour. These were people with access, resources, and protection. People who understood border logistics, security protocols, and how to move dangerous cargo without triggering alarms. The fact that this shipment even made it as far as it did suggested that some people inside the security apparatus, people with clearance and authority, were helping it move forward. That's when things got truly explosive. The investigation revealed that neighboring leader Ibrahim Traoré became aware of the plot, and his response was immediate and intense. Traoré understood what was at stake. In Burkina Faso, his own government had faced repeated destabilization attempts. Armed groups backed by external powers had terrorized the country for years. The idea that a massive weapons cache was being moved across borders to potentially arm insurgents against his allies in Chad wasn't just troubling, it was a red line. Traoré's response triggered something unprecedented: emergency security coordination across the entire Sahel region. Suddenly, what had been a Chad-specific operation became a region-wide alert. Border controls tightened. Intelligence agencies from multiple countries began sharing information. The message was clear. The Sahel nations were not going to tolerate this level of foreign interference and covert destabilization anymore. They were going to fight back. What followed was a cascade of operations that exposed the depth of the conspiracy. Raids were launched simultaneously across multiple countries. Arrests happened in rapid succession. And then came the confessions. People at every level of the network, traffickers, middlemen, even government officials, began talking. Some broke under interrogation. Others saw the writing on the wall and decided to cooperate. And as the pieces of the puzzle came together, officials began describing what had been uncovered as a hidden network, a term that suggests something far more organized, far more deliberate, and far more threatening than simple arms trafficking. But let's pause here and ask the essential question: how does a weapons shipment of this magnitude even get organized in the first place? You don't move 57 trucks full of military hardware across international borders without planning, without connections, without knowing exactly where it's going and who's going to receive it. Every step of the operation required coordination. Weapons had to be sourced. Transportation had to be arranged. Border crossing routes had to be identified. Timing had to be synchronized. And critically, protection had to be guaranteed. Insurance that security forces wouldn't interfere at critical moments. The presence of political insiders and foreign-backed operatives in this network suggests that the operation had a level of sophistication and protection that went well beyond typical smuggling. Someone with authority was facilitating this. Someone with knowledge of security protocols was ensuring the convoy could move. Someone with political cover was insulating the operation from early detection. The fact that Chad's security forces only caught this shipment because of an urgent intelligence tip suggests that the normal systems of border control and cargo inspection had been circumvented or compromised. This raises a disturbing question. How many other shipments got through? How many weapons? How much ammunition? How many explosives made it to their intended destinations before Chad tightened security protocols? If this particular convoy was discovered only through an intelligence alert, what does that tell us about the effectiveness of the standard border security mechanisms? It suggests that regular patrols, routine inspections, and normal protocols were insufficient to catch an operation of this magnitude. Someone had to be watching. Someone had to have specific intelligence about where and when this convoy would move. The investigation's discovery of foreign-backed operatives is perhaps the most revealing detail. This wasn't a spontaneous criminal enterprise by local traffickers seeking profit. This was a coordinated geopolitical operation with external sponsors. Foreign powers, nations with their own strategic interests in the Sahel, were actively working to destabilize regional governments. They were doing it covertly, through proxy networks and hidden partnerships, but they were doing it deliberately. The goal was almost certainly to create the conditions for government collapse, to fragment state authority, to weaken national militaries, and to create power vacuums that could be filled by groups aligned with external interests. The Sahel has always been strategically valuable. It's a vast region rich in resources, positioned at a crossroads between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, and deeply influenced by competing international interests. For decades, various external powers have sought to expand their influence in the region. Some have done so through formal diplomatic channels and development aid. Others have been more aggressive, more covert, and more willing to use destabilization as a tool of geopolitical competition. A weapons shipment of this scale suggests that someone had moved beyond subtle influence and into open covert warfare against the region's governments. But here's the crucial turning point in this story. The Sahel nations themselves decided they would not be passive victims of this interference. When Traoré's response triggered region-wide security coordination, it signaled a fundamental shift in how Sahel governments viewed the threat to their sovereignty. They were not going to wait for international organizations to address the problem. They were not going to hope that external pressures would convince foreign powers to stop their interference. They were going to act collectively, decisively, and unilaterally to protect their own interests. This collective response became a symbol of something larger than just this one weapon shipment. It became a symbol of Africa's growing resistance against foreign interference. For too long, African governments had been treated as passive players in geopolitical games designed and controlled by external powers. Cold War spheres of influence, post-Cold War humanitarian interventions, contemporary military assistance programs that came with strings attached, economic dependency managed by international institutions. At every level, sovereignty had been compromised by external interests. But the Sahel nations were saying something different. When they coordinated across borders to shut down this weapons operation, when they arrested traffickers and officials who participated in the network. When they shared intelligence and synchronized their security responses, they were asserting the right to control their own destiny. They were rejecting the assumption that their internal security would be determined by external powers operating covertly. They were refusing to be destabilized without fighting back. The significance of the raids and arrests that followed cannot be overstated. Each arrest represented a piece of the network that was being dismantled. Each confession represented a brick being pulled from the foundation of the conspiracy. Government officials who had facilitated the operation faced justice. Traffickers who had been middlemen were exposed and incarcerated. The message was sent throughout the region. If you participate in foreign-sponsored destabilization operations against your own country, you will be caught, and you will face consequences. This created a powerful deterrent against further attempts to corrupt government officials or recruit local accomplices. The interrogations and confessions provided crucial intelligence about how the operation worked. Who recruited the participants? How were they incentivized? What promises were made about protection or profit? Who were the foreign handlers providing oversight and direction? How many networks like this were still operating? The intelligence gathered from dismantling this single operation likely provided roadmaps for identifying and stopping other destabilization attempts. But beyond the immediate tactical victories, there was a strategic implication that rippled across the continent. When news of the interception and subsequent investigation broke, it sent a clear signal to every other African government. Collective regional action could effectively counter foreign interference. Pooling intelligence, coordinating security responses, and sharing authority across borders could neutralize covert operations that would be impossible to stop through individual national efforts. This wasn't just about Chad or Burkina Faso anymore. It was about establishing a new model for African security cooperation that prioritized sovereignty over external influence. The weapons themselves tell part of the story too. Rifles, rocket launchers, explosives, these are not defensive weapons. These are offensive weapons designed for insurgencies, for destabilizing a government, for creating the kind of asymmetric conflict that overwhelms security forces and creates space for state collapse. Whoever intended to receive this shipment was planning to launch an armed campaign against established authority. They weren't planning a peaceful protest. They weren't planning negotiation. They were planning armed rebellion, and they were counting on weapons provided by external powers to make that rebellion successful. The volume of ammunition, millions of rounds, suggests planning for a sustained, large-scale conflict. This wasn't a small supply intended for a brief uprising. This was sufficient ammunition to conduct ongoing military operations across an extended period. It suggests that whoever was supposed to receive this shipment had mapped out a long-term insurgency campaign with external support. The rockets and explosives were clearly intended to give the insurgents the capability to strike strategic targets and cause maximum disruption to government authority. What's particularly revealing is that this operation was presumably one component of a larger strategy. Weapons shipments don't materialize in isolation. They're part of a broader plan that includes intelligence support, financial backing, diplomatic protection, and political positioning. If one shipment of this scale was being moved, there were likely other operations underway, other smuggling routes, other contact points with insurgent groups, other means of destabilizing the region. The fact that investigators uncovered a hidden network of traffickers, insiders, and foreign operatives suggests that this infrastructure was sophisticated and extensive. The involvement of government insiders raises perhaps the most uncomfortable questions. Because for a weapons shipment to move undetected across international borders, it needs help from people inside the system. Border guards who look the other way, officials who falsify documents, security personnel who provide intelligence about patrols, port authorities who facilitate loading, intelligence officers who share information about surveillance. Getting all these pieces to align requires recruiting people who have legitimate access and authority. It requires convincing them that the benefits of betraying their country outweigh the risks. And it requires a level of operational security so tight that the conspiracy remains hidden until the moment of interception. The exposure of these insiders was particularly significant because it revealed the vulnerability at the heart of every state's security apparatus. You cannot defend against covert foreign operations if the people inside your own government are helping those operations. No border wall is high enough. No inspection protocol is thorough enough. No patrol pattern is predictable enough to prevent successful smuggling if government officials are deliberately circumventing security measures. The discovery of political insiders in this network forced governments across the Sahel to conduct painful internal audits, to question the loyalty of their own personnel, and to implement new oversight mechanisms to prevent future penetration. But this also highlights why the collective regional response was so important. Because if countries were dealing with this threat in isolation, each would be focused on rooting out corruption and disloyalty within their own government. By coordinating with neighbors, they could cross-check information, identify operatives who had contacts in multiple countries, and dismantle networks that operated across borders. The discovery that Ibrahim Traoré coordinated an emergency response suggests that intelligence sharing revealed not just a Chad-specific threat, but a coordinated regional campaign to destabilize multiple governments. The word shocking appears in descriptions of this discovery, and for good reason. It's shocking to realize that your own government officials might be facilitating foreign destabilization operations. It's shocking to understand the scale of weapons smuggling happening across borders. It's shocking to accept that external powers are actively working to overthrow your elected government through covert means. But shock can be a catalyst for change. And in this case, the shock of discovering this conspiracy prompted the Sahel nations to fundamentally reassess their security arrangements and their approach to sovereignty. The narrative that emerged from these investigations of a vast, coordinated conspiracy involving traffickers, government insiders, and foreign operatives validated what Sahel government leaders had been claiming for years. That their instability wasn't simply the result of economic underdevelopment or lack of education or cultural factors. That their governments weren't collapsing because of incompetence or lack of will. That external powers were actively working to create the conditions for state collapse. This validation was important because it shifted the narrative from internal blame to external threat. And that shift had profound implications for how these governments understood their own legitimacy and how their citizens understood the challenges their countries faced. When news of the operation broke, and when officials began describing it as a symbol of Africa's growing resistance against foreign interference, they were signaling something profound. They were saying that this was not just a security incident. This was a turning point. This was the moment when African governments stopped waiting for the international community to address threats to their sovereignty and started acting decisively on their own. This was when they demonstrated that they could detect, intercept, investigate, and dismantle sophisticated foreign-backed operations. This was when they showed that they could coordinate across borders, share intelligence, and present a united front against external interference. The implications of this moment extended far beyond the immediate region. Other African governments watched what the Sahel nations did, and they understood the message. Collective security cooperation could work. Regional coordination could be effective. Standing together against external interference was possible and necessary. The raid arrests and confessions became a case study in African resistance, a model for how governments facing similar threats might respond. It suggested a future where African nations increasingly handled their own security challenges without waiting for external permission, external intervention, or external validation. But this also raised questions about what external powers would do in response. Because if their covert destabilization operations were being disrupted, they would likely adapt. They might use different routes, different networks, different methods. They might increase investment in recruiting insiders. They might try more sophisticated approaches that would be harder to detect. Or they might escalate more openly, using military intervention or economic coercion to achieve their objectives. The discovery of this conspiracy didn't end the competition for influence in the Sahel. It simply moved it to a new phase. The hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition, the rocket launchers, the explosives, these physical artifacts of the conspiracy served as undeniable proof that external destabilization wasn't theoretical. It was real, it was happening, and it would have had catastrophic consequences if it had succeeded. The weight of that evidence, the tangible proof sitting in warehouses after the seizure, gave Sahel governments something they hadn't fully had before: irrefutable justification for taking aggressive measures against external interference and for expanding their own security capabilities and intelligence operations. The confessions that emerged from interrogations of network members likely provided crucial details about financing, communication networks, target audiences for recruitment, and the identities of foreign handlers. In intelligence terms, this haul of information was potentially as valuable as the weapons themselves. It provided insight into how destabilization operations were structured, who the key decision-makers were, what the timeline looked like, and what the ultimate objectives were. With that information, security services could identify other operatives, other networks, other planned operations before they materialized. As we step back and consider the larger significance of this event, we're looking at a moment when Africa's security landscape underwent a visible transformation. For decades, African nations had been struggling against insurgencies, terrorism, and political instability that they attributed primarily to internal factors: poverty, ethnic tension, weak institutions, lack of state capacity. And while these factors certainly contribute to instability, they don't exist in a vacuum. External powers had been deliberately exploiting and amplifying these vulnerabilities as tools of geopolitical competition. And for decades, many African leaders were either unaware of or politically unable to openly acknowledge this external interference. The discovery of this weapons conspiracy and the coordinated regional response that followed represented something different. It represented African governments explicitly naming foreign interference as a central security threat and taking collective action against it. It represented a refusal to be passive victims of geopolitical competition. It represented an assertion that African nations had the right, the capability, and the necessity to control their own security destinies. And symbolically, it represented a break from patterns that had dominated the continent for centuries. A break from external powers using covert means to maintain dominance over African resources and African governance. The fact that Sahel leaders framed this operation as a symbol of growing resistance suggests they understood they were part of a larger historical moment. The weapons interception wasn't an isolated success. It was evidence of a shift in African agency, in African capability, and an African willingness to directly confront external powers over issues of sovereignty. Whether that shift would prove sustainable, whether it would expand to other regions, whether external powers would change their behavior in response, these were the questions that hung in the air as the Sahel nations consolidated their regional security response. One final consideration: the people arrested in the investigations, the officials who were exposed, the traffickers who were intercepted, they all faced consequences. But they were ultimately small players in a much larger game. The real architects of this destabilization operation, the foreign government officials or intelligence operatives who planned it and directed it, remained mostly beyond the reach of Sahel justice systems. The conspirators who resided in other countries, who had never set foot in Chad or Burkina Faso, who were ordering the shipment from air-conditioned offices thousands of miles away, they would face no consequences from these raids and arrests. This created an asymmetry in accountability that raised difficult questions about whether even a successful interception could truly address the fundamental problem of external interference. But perhaps that's not the point. Perhaps the point is that the Sahel nations demonstrated they could disrupt these operations, even if they couldn't punish the architects. They proved they could protect their own territory from foreign weapon supplies. They proved they could discover hidden networks and hold conspirators accountable. They proved they could coordinate across borders and present a unified security front. And in proving those things, they changed the calculus for external powers considering future destabilization attempts. The Midnight Convoy, the discovery of the hidden weapons cache, The investigation that exposed a vast network of conspirators, the region-wide security coordination, the raids and arrests and confessions. This sequence of events embodied a narrative of African resistance that will likely reverberate for years. It demonstrated that the age of passive African governments accepting external interference without resistance was ending. It showed that Sahel nations possessed the intelligence capability, the security apparatus, and the political will to detect and counter sophisticated destabilization operations. And it suggested that the future of African geopolitics would be shaped not just by external powers competing for influence, but by African nations asserting their own agency in determining their own futures. That's the real story buried in the details of this weapons interception, not just what was discovered, but what it revealed about changing power dynamics on the African continent. Not just the conspiracy that was exposed, but what its exposure meant about Africa's capacity to resist and respond. Not just the weapons that were seized, but what seizing them represented about an emerging African willingness to take control of their own security. The midnight convoy